What's a really ducked up thing you've witnessed as a kid, but didn't realize it was until you were older? Lived in a townhouse. In my bedroom at night I would hear the kids next door scream and cry. My parents called the police once, but the man claimed he was playing with his kids and didn't let them in. Apparently the police couldn't do anything. Found out when I was older that the man had later tried to kill the whole family, kids, baby included, with a pair of scissors. My parents fighting. Whoever was losing would say to me, I'm going to run away and drown myself if mummy daddy don't stop shouting. I can't take it anymore, and then proceed to leave the house. They're both still alive, and in hindsight I don't know if they ever meant what they said, but now I'm about to have a child of my own. I can't ever imagine doing that to a child, let alone my own child. Living in an abusive situation as a whole. As a child, domestic violence was the norm for me. When I was at a friend from elementary school one time and his parents were having a disagreement over something, I asked my friend when they'd start hitting each other, and he just looked at me funny, not getting what I meant. As an adult, looking back on my childhood, it's only then you really understand how ducked up it all was. As a child it's intense and frightening, but you don't yet grasp the full situation yet. My aunt hanged herself in the kitchen while she was supposed to be babysitting me. I was 5 and asleep when it actually happened, so I didn't know my parents had gone out and left me with her. I remember waking up and walking into the kitchen and she was hanging, but it didn't really register that it was my aunt because her face was obscured by her hair. I was by myself for more than a couple of hours until I started crying, can't remember why. Neighbors came to see what the fuss was about and called my parents and the police. Parents were pretty devastated because the reason they asked her to babysit me was because my brother had an emergency ruptured appendix, and they came home to yellow tape around the house. At her funeral I was told she died because she had been sick. Was around 13, 14 when I figured out it was suicide. Edit, my aunt was not selfish or a bitch or a cunt. What little I can remember of her I adore, and the rest of my family speaks of her glowingly. She was just depressed. She had already attempted suicide a year before I was born. Neither me nor my family hate or blame or resent her, because she wasn't in her right mind when she chose death. She was mentally ill, and we only hold her illness responsible, not her. Thank you for all the empathy and support. I'm doing alright. By the time I realized how she died I had already mourned and moved past the loss of a familiar face. The knowledge didn't affect me much. The only thing that is most probably a result of this is that I'm pretty apathetic when it comes to death in general, for which I see a therapist every now and then. But I'm okay. Cross-posting this comment from another question last year that was similar. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide and seek style game. She would yell hit the deck randomly and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago while retelling the story that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood, and she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. I had a cousin that committed suicide by jumping into a quarry. I was 12. My mom and I went to the wake, and when we got to the body, the casket was closed from the chest down, but it was glaringly obvious that he had been at least partially decapitated, because his head was just kind of awkwardly shoved on. They tried their best, but apparently you can't make that look natural. So, years later as an adult, I started wondering why in the world my mom would let me see that. So I asked her. It turned out to actually be a thing that no one in the family spoke about openly. My mom didn't know he would look like that, and neither did anyone else. After my cousin died, he was transported to a funeral home. My aunt insisted on an open casket, which the funeral home refused. It somehow escalated to the point that my aunt hired another funeral home on the condition they have a viewing. No one except my aunt knew any of this until after the wake. So people start showing up, view the body, and see that he doesn't have a neck and was decapitated. And it isn't like you can go around and say for your information the dead guy is all jacked up from jumping into a quarry and you really shouldn't look. Edit for those asking. It was a rock quarry. He pulled off to the side of the highway, parked his car, and jumped. Here link is the quarry. You can see the highway in the background of the photo on that page. This was 30 years ago. I was visiting my grandparents in Switzerland when I was about 8 or 9. One evening I happened to be on the balcony looking down at the street, and I saw a white van stop at the side of the road, and 3 or 4 men got out of it and ran up to a man walking along and grabbed him, knock him down, and carry him into the back of the van. Then they drove away quickly. It all happened really fast, so much so that the man barely had a chance to call out for help. I didn't understand what I'd just seen, so I asked my grandfather. I remember him looking down at his feet for a long time before he told me not to worry about it. Some years later I spoke to my father about it. He told me that at that time, a lot of immigrants from places like Kosovo were being abducted like that, and it was some sort of turf war. My mom used to sleep with dudes while I was in the same bed as her. Never really clicked. Today I learned I got older. Let's say my therapist isn't a fan of my mother at all. As a kid coming back from Halloween Horror Nights real late at night, I'd just stare out the window the whole ride home. I saw a truck with the windshield smashed completely out and a man sitting very stiff and unnatural in front of it. Now when I pass that same spot there's a memorial grave marker there, and I realize that man was probably dead or dying, got thrown through his windshield. My mum had to work when I was little and my older sisters were in school. I was locked in the bathroom during the day until my sisters came home from school and let me out. Sometimes they wouldn't let me out, so they didn't have to watch me. They were 7 and 9 years older than me, and I was somewhat afraid of them because they were not very nice to me, so I would often stay in the bathroom or hide in the hamper. It does explain why I'm perfectly okay to be alone. My mom would actively drink and drive with me in the car. I was a pretty naive kid, so I didn't think anything of it when my mom would fill a Dixie cup with wine and put it in the cup holder. It was so normalized to me growing up that it wasn't until I had my own kid that I realized how ducked up this was. One of my youngest memories was my dad crawling into bed naked with me and my sister and cuddle us. For most of my childhood, he did this often. When I got to be about 9 or 10, I realized he was pissing himself from drinking too much, and then waking up and stripping naked and just crawling to the closest bed. He used to pass out on the couch or recliner. I also remember we had roaches so bad that he didn't even care. I remember watching him swipe a roach off his plate while eating, not killing it, just pushing it aside. Edit getting a lot of comments about how things could have been worse. Unfortunately, they were. My response was to the question of what's something ducked up that you witnessed as a kid that you didn't know was wrong. I knew everything else was wrong. My therapist has since confirmed that even this situation was wrong. I thought that that's what dads do when they get drunk. My earliest memory of it was around age 4. Staying up waking my dad when he would stop breathing, later realizing he was overdosing on opiates. I watched my friend try to murder his older brother. They were constantly fighting with each other, and I knew their father was a drinker and would hit them. So it was a rough environment they grew up in. One day a group of us were at their house alone. No parents. They start fighting, and one of them pushes the other through a glass pane door, shattering it. This sets them off to real fighting, and my friend grabbed a kitchen knife and then tackled his brother. He jammed the knife downwards towards his brother's face with all his body weight, and the older brother was barely holding him up. Luckily he was able to shove him to the side and wrestle away the knife. My friends and I were stupidly laughing and were like, damn, they're really going at it. Even then I knew it was crazy, but I grew up in an unstable home myself, so it didn't affect me much. Years later, I shudder to think what could have happened. Had a guy die in my arms when I was 15 circa 2007. I had stolen my mum's car to sneak over to my girlfriend's house in the middle of the night. On my way back home around 2 AM I saw a car crashed on the side of the road. I of course pulled over and called 911. I had grabbed a flashlight from my mother's glove box and was scanning around in this field next to the fence that the car had crashed into because there was no one inside. It scanned over a body in the field. I rushed over while on the phone with 911 and they told me how to check pulse and helped me through CPR. I was previously a lifeguard that summer but was freaked the duck out, so they were calmly explaining it to me on speakerphone. At some point after a little while he actually began respirating again, but it was very jagged and terrible breathing. He stopped breathing again less than a minute later after what sounded like very liquidy sounds in his breathing. I tried again for CPR to no avail. He never spoke or anything and could have been brain dead for all I know. I assume it was a collapsed lung or something, but yeah, that guy died in my arms. I remember the ambulance when they arrived said something about him being 18 and intoxicated, but I don't even remember tasting alcohol because I was so hyped up on adrenaline. The craziest part was they didn't even ask me for any information. The police just sent me on my way home as a child because it was a small town and I was close to home. I snuck back in and went to sleep and never snuck out again. I never told my parents that story. My wife is the only one who has heard it until now. Too long didn't read snuck out when I was younger. There was a wreck on the road. Guy died in my arms after CPR. My mother's second husband coming into my room and running his hand up my leg slowly, then suddenly standing up and walking out. Then after he was kicked out, coming to my school bus stop. I was the only one who got on there and acting really weird. Realized a few years ago, guy was trying to molest me and almost kidnapped me. My friend had a lock on the outside of her bedroom door. I thought it was weird, but didn't really think much about it. It turned out her parents would literally lock her in her room for long periods of time as punishment. I caught my grandmother with her hand down my cousin's pants. She had done the same sort of thing, and more to me, when I was his age. At the time, I thought I made her that way. I didn't make her that way. Grandma was a pedophile. When I was about 6 or 7, I remember these two girls came to our house and proceeded to beat my mom up. My mom, being no more than 26 or so, was then shoved into the garbage can. She couldn't get out, and I remember just crying and holding my little sister who was no more than 1 year old at the time. It didn't really hit me until I was about 17. I never forgot what it looked like. My mom just crying and bleeding while trying to get out of the garbage can. I witnessed some really intense suicide attempts by my brother 14 years older than me when I was anything from 5 years old up. For example, once I was playing in the front yard with friends from my street and my mum and dad called me inside quickly. My brother didn't wait for me to go inside before he attempted in the front yard, for example, one end of a rope around a tree, the other end around his neck, and he sped off in his car. To me, that experience was scary but normal. The police came so many times to de-escalate the situation. I used to run away to neighbors' houses when he got in that headspace. I was like, maybe 18 when I realized that wasn't okay, normal, that not everyone experienced that level of suicidal attempts from family. My mom going into the bathroom with a guy and being in there for about 30 minutes. I had the most disgusting feeling in my stomach, and when I got older I realized why. She was cheating on my dad. I was once at one of those birthday parties in McDonald's late 90s as a young child. There was another party going on the opposite side of the restaurant. So it was pretty chaotic with kids running around everywhere and only a small amount of adults to corral them. There was a man wearing a red shirt and blue jeans sitting and eating kind of close to the other party, which was odd in itself, because most adults that were coming in were getting their food and getting out of the noise of 20+ screaming kids as fast as possible. I only remember him because looking back on it a little while later, I saw him leaving the McDonald's with a kid from the other party. The kid wasn't struggling or anything, but the man was kind of rushing him out. In my kid brain I assumed it was his dad or whatever. But a couple days later my parents found out through mutual friends that there was an attempted kidnapping in the McDonald's we were at. I don't know if this is true, but part of me feels like I witnessed the attempting kidnapping. Thank God they caught the guy and the kid was okay. And because of that incident my parents lectured my brother and I heavily on stranger danger. As a kid we had a young family. Dad was about 30 and he would always play baseball wiffle ball with the neighborhood kids. For some reason anytime the ball went into his bushes he would freak out like stop. I'll get it. I found out years later after he died. He was an alcoholic and was hiding it from his family. He died of cirrhosis and I found out he hid his bottles of vodka in the bushes. Really sad to think of now. Because despite his illness addiction, he was such a good influence on the kids in the neighborhood. Always taught us to respect elders and work hard at things if we want to become great. He was a great guy. Very sad to think about now. Edit substituted illness addiction for issues. Edit removed raging because may I have used wrong. I meant he drank a lot since it was enough to ruin his liver. Thanks for correction.